lucky and fortunate to have Waterford roots and to have been involved with so many of you over the years, and very lucky to be a native of Waterford. I can't tell you how much I benefited by having two wonderful parents, 4 brothers, and a family of 5 children, and we all have Waterford connections. And I brought along the second history book, and thought I could save a little time by simply saying, if you want to know where I was born, you can look at the Highland Farm picture on pages 253 and 4. Many of you know Plummer Hill was basically a Millettville in the 30s and 40s and even before. Right by that farm, which became the Morse apple orchard after my grandfather Arthur Rice Millett passed away in 1950, the farm was sold, and within walking distance of that farm there were Addison, Arthur, Raymond, Frank, Clyde, and Lawrence. All Millets within easy walking distance. So I was lucky enough to be born in 1937. Soon after my mother and father married, actually 3 years after they married, but they met at Bates College. My dad was the oldest of 6 siblings of Arthur Rice Millett and Grace Sawin Millett. So we have roots that I call Rices and Sawins, going back to many, many years in Waterford, Albany with the Sawin family, and the Rice family too has been involved in many different locations. So when Andrew asked me to come, he said, first of all, talk about the history of Waterford town government. And I agreed to do that, and I started doing my work with all of Bill Payne's old Mutiny Book Times, all of Nancy's Waterford Echoes, trying to get a little historical perspective of this building, what's happened in this building until it was no longer used as a town meeting, and many of the people who contributed to it. And I think that we later had a conversation, I think it was early in June, Andrew, where he talked about maybe I ought to talk about state government as well. So I'd like to do both. I'd like to talk about Waterford and Maine state government and give you a little bit of background of what I believe government is all about. It's easy to think about government because if you go to a meeting now and then, you'll find a reason to continue. So I started thinking about government in terms of 3 different categories. First, the forms of government, looking around the globe. And you may remember that we know that we are the beneficiaries of a change from the English colonies, which were a monarchy, and we know that there are dictatorships still existing around the globe. We know there are communist countries, and we know there are democracies. And we are in that lucky category of being a democracy. So I thought I would just look at Googling government and Googling democracy, so that at least we have a common framework for what they are. And the definition is pretty simple. Government is the most common definition. The organization, machinery, or agency through which a political unit exercises authority and performs functions which are usually classified according to the distribution of power within it. Power is an important word. I've never thought of government as being a power brokering job, but it is. It is all about authority and responsibility wrapped around power. So those are the levels of government, the forms of government that I work from. And then I talk about the levels of government, and being here in the U.S. and having been involved in now all of these levels. We have the federal level, we have the state level, we have the county level, we have some below county level, multiple town issues, and then we have local government. And those in-between issues, you can recall from the early days of the formation of SAD 17, where we have 8 towns participating in the school district. You know, the Waterford, Albany, Albany, Stoneham, Trash Elimination is a combination of 3 different governmental units. And so we are lucky to have those 3 or those levels of government within a democracy. I didn't give a definition of a democracy, but it's pretty simple too. And again, my grandson Googled it because I don't Google well. But it ends up, you get back to the dictionary, which is a common tool. And a democracy, what do you do it? Democracy is easily defined as a form of government in which the people elect representatives to make decisions, policies, laws, etc., according to law. So that's where we are, where we come from, and what I'd like to talk about here tonight. Having been involved in local government early in my life, and then more importantly here in Waterford, since we moved here in 1977, we've been 48 years on Hay Hill Road, my wife, and we had 5 children. We're now down to 3, one of whom is here tonight. My daughter Kathy and her husband Tony Van Crone from Arizona, spending the month with us. And Kathy, why don't you just stand up? This is my social organization. So she knows, and some of you may know, my dad was an educator by training at Bates College. He was first and foremost a farmer, a family man, an educator, a public servant, and he loved sports. When he died, and my brother and I, a little brother, said things at his interment in the spring of '84, I said, these are the 5 things I remember my dad for. A lifelong commitment to family, and we had family reunions so long go back, and so many in the years since he came back here in retirement. And we went back to the roots that he spoke so heavily and frankly about, meaning his father was Arthur Rice Millett. And Arthur Rice Millett's father was Addison Levi Millett, who married Ella Rice, a sister to the older George Rice. And we have Dick Deans here tonight, who descends from that particular Rice family. So Dad was very focused on the Rice family. And then, of course, his mother was one of 3 daughters of Merritt and Antoinette Sawin, who lived on Sawin Hill over in North Waterford, just across the Albany line. So those origins are still in my mind, and I know they were always in my dad's mind, and my mother and he were very responsible and faithful to those family reunions. We didn't live here long, I didn't, because my dad became a teacher. He graduated from Bates College in 1934. He had met my mother, who came as a freshman in his junior year from Newington, Connecticut. The older daughter of one of the nicest, families, but particularly her father, Richard Hulbert Jr., was the most generous and supportive ancestor for me, anyway, for all 5 of my brothers growing up. So they got married up at the Highland Farm, where Dad had grown up, and they had a bedroom upstairs where they were married. And then when they got up to having children, there weren't many hospitals around at that time. So my older brother was born up there in the farm in 1935. Dad couldn't get a teaching job the first year, but the second year he spent 2 years in Winthrop, then 10 years in the southern part of Maine, all of which he was renting because he didn't have property. And the farming blood was still in him, and he never lost it, and still retained it at the very end. But the family was so closely aligned with those ancestors, they named my older brother Richard Hulbert Millett, right out of the gate from my mother's father. They named me Junior because my father was Howard Sawin Millett, and I was called Howard Sawin Millett Jr., and rather than call me Howard or Howie or some crazy spin-off of that, he was known as Howard, so I was known as Sawin, and always had been. Then my next younger brother, older of the first of three, Addison, was named after my great-grandfather Addison and my grandfather, Arthur. He was called Arthur Addison Millett. And then after that, we had two more, and they were named out of the book. They didn't have any more family connections, but we actually were a solid family. We didn't really get back to where I think my dad wanted to be until 1946. He wanted a farm. He had been renting for 12 years of teaching and administrative work. He became a principal in his third year and lived to be a headmaster and a principal over many years and coached sports, etc. But in 1946, they learned of a farm up in Dixmont, which was up for sale. Dixmont is in the southern portion of Penobscot County. You go from Waldo into Penobscot, and it's the first town that you would get to if you went up Route 9 from Augusta. And that's where I grew up. And basically, all four of my brothers grew up as well. Because we had the farm, we had one-room school, just like you have here, and I was a one-room school janitor for 2 years. I got up in the morning, helped my dad move the cows, came down the house, took a 2.5-gallon can of well water, walked up a quarter of a mile to the one-room school, filled the tub of water for drinking purposes, started the fire, brought in the firewood, swept the floors, got rid of the trash, and walked back home. And for that, I got 40 cents a day. And I actually thought that was big money back then because it rolled out to be $2 a week. And I saved every nickel for 2 years. 36 weeks and $72, and twice that. I had enough to buy a Guernsey cow.
Wow.
And that was where I think the farming kind of took over. But education was always the driving force of our upbringing. And I think we could have asked for a better situation than growing up on a farm, having roots back here, coming back here to visit, and knowing that in time we would be back here for the long haul. So that's my background, and there's another little story in here that names the boys. It's the How on Our Acres piece, and it's on pages 52 and 3 of this book. And I won't refer to it again, but it's nice reading, as you all know. The pictures are great. And some of the people who contributed to it, we owe a huge debt of gratitude, because they assembled both 100-year periods, 1775 to 1875 and 1875 to 1976. And this second one is where I drew most of my material about Waterford government. So, at the very early days of my youth, my father and mother took me everywhere to town meetings and local Grange meetings, Farm Bureau meetings, and I got interested in meeting older people, knowing what they were concerned about, and hearing them. Just as a youngster, I was 8 years old when I moved to Dixmont. And then I started going to town meetings in Dixmont, and I was blown away with how much I learned from their second Saturday in March, just like we do the first Saturday. Up there it was mud season, and we had dirt roads, so people were so anxious to get out of the winter and into the spring, but it always came with a snowstorm or muddy roads. But anyway, we had a moderator who was a teacher that we knew. He was a crackerjack at parliamentary procedure. He talked with authority. He was a little bit sarcastic, but he talked with authority, and he managed with a disciplinary approach a town meeting in Dixmont. And I studied him, and I studied the way in which people came to those meetings with a lot on their minds, as well as the budget and the town meeting report. And they wanted to basically have an opportunity to speak. They wanted a forum. They wanted to be able to tell the people around them, the townspeople that they probably hadn't seen a lot of during the winter, how they felt about Dixmont town government. And they'd ask a lot of questions. And he, the moderator, handled them pretty well. But I didn't feel he had handled them as well as I wanted to when I became a moderator, because I knew I was going to be. And I became it very soon. I started teaching in 1959. In 1962, I was asked to be a selectman in the town of Dixmont at the age of 23. And it was a bunch of old people. We were elected for one-year terms, and somebody said to me, why don't you put your name in there for third selectman? And I didn't know what I was doing, but I did. And I got elected 7 years in a row. And the second year after that, this moderator moved away. And they said to me, well, why don't you try moderating? So I did. And I'll tell you, that was like my education classroom with adults. It was the same process that I experienced there. Ask questions, get good answers, don't lie to them, don't criticize them for raising a question, and if you don't have the answer, get it back to them. But don't make that notion of interaction a problem, because it's really not a problem, it's a solution. And it was the same style that I took as a teacher. I told my kids, don't ever fail to ask a question if you need to have a better understanding of the subject matter we're talking about, and I will never embarrass you. And it worked pretty well. It worked well in the classroom, it worked well with adults, and it still worked well in the legislature. I still think of myself as a teacher, and I'm working for the people, and I'm working to help them solve problems, not to just blame people or criticize people or look around for people that you can be angry about and critical of. Look at it from the point of view of, you're up front, you have a vote, you have a voice, but do what you think is right, and do it for the right reasons. So that got me thinking in the mid-60s. I was an administrator then. Brian Scheibel's father was actively involved in the school district, which had been formed in Carmel, Alabama, where I was teaching. And I said to the school board that I worked with, you know, I think this business, what goes on in Augusta, might be helpful to our school district and the towns that I would represent if I were elected. And they thought about it, and they thought, well, heck, you're involved in education, school funding is critical, you're a selectman, town funding is critical, roads are critical. Maybe if you went down there, you might be able to help us back home. And I'll be darned if I didn't get an agreement from them to let me run, and I would teach and serve as a principal right up until Christmas vacation, go to Augusta, and come back if there were days when they weren't there, but they allowed me to pay for a substitute to teach the 3 classes that I was teaching out of my own pocket and kept me on the payroll. If not, I wouldn't be able to survive because the legislature paid $2,500 for 2 years back then. This is back in 68 through 72. 10 cents a mile for travel and maybe $5 a day for meals, but you couldn't live on it. And you can't do it now, obviously. Things have changed a lot. But when I first sat in the legislature, state government, I saw it as 495 towns, all represented in the state of Maine, in the same way that I was representing my 6 towns, Carmel, Dixmont, Etna, Herman, Van, and Plymouth, all of which I had worked with, schools, towns, knew everybody, good job, and I loved it. And I thought to myself, this is the best classroom I've ever had. It was better than my academic years, my baccalaureate degree, my master's degree, because you actually saw and heard from real people. And they spoke from the heart, and they basically came to closure on issues that you may not know a lot about, but you learned a lot if you were willing to listen. And so that's my background in the legislative roles that I played. And I didn't mention this, but you all know this. There are 3 branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And I was in the legislative role as a selectman, and also as a selectman, we ran the town. So we actually used executive power in those days, early as we do here in Waterford. So a real opportunity to get my feet wet, and before I knew it, I was appointed Commissioner of Education, and by Jim Longley. I had chaired the House Education Committee in my 2nd year in the legislature, and I didn't even know this guy. And he ran as the former head of the Maine Management Cost Survey, appointed by Governor Ken Curtis, who was a Democrat, and who said to Jim Longley, if I appoint you, I assume you're not going to use this as a stepping stone to some future role. And they had a conversation, which I was never present for, but Ken was quite surprised when, after the report was submitted, and it talked about how to make government more like a business. Because Longley was an insurance agent, a very successful insurance agent, and he had all kinds of ideas to make government at the state level more efficient, effective, and economical, the 3 E's. And he asked me to be his Commissioner of Education, and boy, I didn't expect to even be asked or even thought of. I was working for the school boards and superintendents then, and one of my school board members knew one of the members of Longley's screening committee. He said, why don't you call this Millett guy? And they did, and I went in for an interview with the screening committee and then with the governor. And while we were sitting up here on Deer Hill Road, just before Christmas of 1974, I got a call from Governor Longley. I'm ready to appoint you if you're ready to serve. And I said, I'm in. And I'll tell you, that was a fast ride for 4 years, because Longley was an independent with a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. All 4 years, he had the most vetoes overridden of any governor I've ever known, because he didn't like what was coming to him in the form of enactments, so he vetoed them without thinking or knowing how he would create a coalition of Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate to not override them. But they did, repeatedly. And one of the legislators put a pin on his coat, VETO, and underneath it in small letters he wrote, very easy to override. And Longley was successful. I think he could have run again, but his health wasn't great. So he left, and I continued to serve in that role with Governor Brennan for the better part of a year. And then I served all of the 8 years for Dr. McKernan, and 5.5 years for Angus King, and 3.5 years for Paul Tage. So I've got 22 years in the executive branch, 20 years in the legislative branch of Maine state government. And I tell you, I've learned a lot, and I think I've helped people make good decisions and represent the people as well as I could have. I'm quite proud of that, and I've had all kinds of, you may have heard about a resolution that was offered when I served my last day in the legislature on May 10th of 2024. And I got accolades from everybody. I felt kind of guilty because they held me up as not being partisan, but being mature enough to seek solutions and not change or go after scapegoats. And for that, I think I found myself really feeling good. In the meantime, I came to, after that, I worked with the superintendent of school boards for a few years before and after Longley. And then we came here in 1977. My dad bought some land on Deer Hill in '73. He had just retired as a superintendent. He wanted to get back to farming. That was all he wanted in his retirement years, get back to farming. And a year later, he said to me, I just found out this land that just above us, borders us, 25 acres, owned by Bridgeton Academy Outing Club. Would you be interested in buying that? Wow. I didn't have money, but I went to bed. You always savings bank. I had a little loan, and I bought that land. And 2 years later, we built our current home on it. And for 48 years, I've been proud to be a Waterfordite in real words. So town government in Waterford got me interested right off quickly because women and men in this building, around this fire, this stove, in the first Saturday in March, I watched the first 2 years, 76 and 7, and I was asked to be the moderator at 78 or 79, I believe. And it was fun. It was really fun because it was just like what I've done in Dixmont, what I've done in the classroom, and what I tried to do in the legislature. And that is to keep order, decorum, treat people fairly, get to the decision on each of the warrant articles, and not get into feuds with people, but allow them to speak and make their point known and not ridicule them. And Brenda Begonski was the town clerk in 2000 or 1976. She will have been involved in that work 50 years come next year. And I look back in your book about all of the selectmen who had served as the treasurers, the town clerks, etc., including school board members. And we have a history in Waterford of people serving for decades in town government, so it's voluntary, little remuneration, and a lot of hard work. And volunteerism in Waterford is probably at the height of any town I've ever lived in or worked with. Because we don't lack for people stepping up, just like you people have when you started the society. So in that first year of moderating, I remember not knowing initially that women sat here and men sat there. And I had actually come with my parents, and I could see over here, and everybody kind of looked at us as if we didn't know what was going on. But we moderated for many, many years in this building until it became necessary to move toward the municipal building. And my answer from Brenda is the last one we had here in this building was 1997. And we had one in the school before the municipal building was ready in 98. And now, since 99, we've been at the municipal building. And I told Brenda when she and I got talking, I said, "You're in this for long haul, right?" And she said, "Yep." And I said, "I think I could match you for 40 years if you're willing to hang around." And we had this contest between us. I wasn't going to retire until she stopped, and she wasn't going to retire until I stopped. Well, I managed to get to about 43 or 4, and Brenda's still at it. So obviously she outperformed me. And then I had a chance to serve as a selectman, very short period of time, one term really, and not quite a full term. Billy Sawyer had been a selectman. He was Tim's father and Todd's grandfather, lived up on Plummer Hill. He had been a selectman, the first selectman for many years, had been re-elected in the town meeting in 1986. And I was teaching school at the University of Southern Maine. And they needed somebody because he passed away in early fall. And I had been the moderator, and people said, we need somebody to step up. And I was encouraged to run, and I ran against Les Ammon. I'll talk about Les a little bit later on, because Les was a nice guy. He was set in his ways, and we didn't always agree, but I always respected him. And I won that one, and then McKernan brought me into state government again in the winter of '87. And I started saying, we had a select board meetings mostly here on Monday nights, 2 or 3 times a month. Ella Button, John Roberts, and me. And Maxine Roque would come and cover the meetings wherever we met, whether it was here or John's house or Ella's place, and do a little column for the news. But it was fun, but I found myself in the second and third years unable to miss being here every Monday night. I was in the legislature, working with the legislature from McKernan the whole time. Often I didn't get out there until well into the evening. So I didn't run again. But that gave me another experience. So I had 10 years total as a select person, more than 60 years as a moderator. So town government is where I cut my teeth. And I know I'm running probably beyond what you expected, Andrew, but let me try to give you a perspective quickly about my experiences with local government and state government in terms of what changed during that period, what has changed for the worse and for the better since then. So this is just my recollections. In town meetings, towns voting has changed in so many ways. We used to come in here the first Saturday in March, Article 1, choose a moderator to preside at said meeting. Article 2, to elect a selectman assessor over the overseer of the poor, for either 1 or 2 or 3 year period, and then a town clerk and a road commissioner. And all of those votes would take up a good hour and a half in the first part of the meeting. Wow. So you didn't get to the meat of the warrant until 10:30 or 11 o'clock. We didn't have food here, so we had to push through to get the meetings to the conclusion by early afternoon. And it was often a struggle. And I remember some things about it when the debate would continue on for a while, and I'd be looking over there at the last window where the sun would be coming in, and Lawrence Millett and Albert Rice, two guys who were part of my ancestry, were sitting there with grins on their face all meeting long, because they knew me, they knew my father, and they saw what was going on as kind of baptizing me, but wanting to know or wanting to watch and see how things went on. So I will never forget one meeting when it went long. We had a question and article that took about half an hour or more to get resolved. So when I walked out through there, Loris and Albert sit together. They looked at me and they said, "There's a lot to it, ain't they?" And that was Waterford speak, but it was a true statement from the heart. And they enjoyed what we were doing. And we did a lot, but things have changed. After a while, we stopped doing the electing of the selectman, clerk, and road commissioner, treasurer at town meeting, and did it in referendum form the day before. And that worked well when we got up to the municipal building. I think we even might have tried it in the school. But in the late 90s, we started doing that. That took away a lot of time. And then we got to replace that time, and Bill Stockwell knows this very well, because he was active on the planning board. We started considering ordinances and zoning and a plan for the town of Waterford for future development. And that caused articles to come before the town meeting which hadn't been brought in the years prior, because we didn't have zoning, and we didn't have much of a state or local plan. And that would be a long discussion, and that's where I remember Les Gammon, when we got over to the municipal building, he had a seat on one of the fire trucks, and he was there every meeting. He never moved. And when the planning board articles came up, or whatever it was, even though it had been through a local public hearing, he had served and been at all those meetings, he wanted to debate every one of them. And that took a lot of time, kind of replaced the electing of officers. And, but it was something you had to do, and we did it well, and I think thanks to Bill and planning board members, including Colin Holm right now, and I know Ted Gerber's on the planning board, he's put in a lot of volunteer time. No real recognition, but we've got a pretty good set of ordinances, and we've done the town pretty well. Other things that changed, we started appointing the town clerk, and that took away the need for an annual election. We did referendum votings the day before for electing officers, and then had a warrant article, a warrant that had probably 60 articles in the usual form. Bill Haynes and Nancy Marcotte have looked at history for a lot of reasons, but when we left here, the town reports were 6 by 9. When we get up to the town office in the municipal building, they became this. And there's some question about the years that we left and the years that we moved to different places. Brenda gave me her record. I've read Bill Haynes' Mutiny Brook Times, and we're off by a year or so. Somebody said the last one was here.
The last one here was 97.
97.
Yeah, and
that's what Brenda said. This is the 2025 warrant, town report for the fiscal year 24. So there's always that 1 year difference, but this is a much more comprehensive town report. They stopped mailing them to everybody, so if you really wanted to know what was going on, you went to the town office and picked it up. You didn't try to walk in green or not knowing what was even in it in your first trip in on Saturday. I used the Maine Moderator's Manual, which is a parliamentary procedure document, and Maine Municipal Association puts it together. It's a lengthy document, and I didn't memorize it, but I had a pretty good idea what it included. And first thing we would do, under my moderating, is at the pleasure of the meeting that we adopt the Maine Moderator's Manual as a guide for the rules of this meeting. Nobody ever challenged it, and I made sure I knew it front and backward. There were 2 or 3 things that are unique here. Some people still don't understand this, but you cannot, if you have an article raising money and you put the dollar amount that the select board recommends in the article, you can only move it down. You can't move it up. If it's below the article in a recommendation, you can do whatever you want. You can't change the purpose of the article, but you can move the money up or down, or put amendments to it, as long as they're consistent with the article. The reason I think was if people got the warrant in the mail, they saw what the money raising was all about, they at least had the comfort of knowing they can't raise more than what's in those articles. So maybe I don't need to come to town meeting. I don't think that was a good reason. It was a convenient way of saying to the people, you can't do that. You can't make that article raise more money unless it's a recommendation level. Secondly, you cannot allow amendments to amendments. It gets tough enough when you have a motion to move the article as printed, with a motion and a second, you're debating that. Somebody stands and says, I'd like to amend the article, and here's my amendment motion. You put that motion out there for a second, and you hold it for discussion, and every now and then, somebody would say, I don't like that amendment. I would like to amend the amendment. And we were all told, as moderators, don't go there, because that's going to get into a trap that you'll never get out of. Stay with the article, get some sense of where it's going, if it's supported, and then look at other amendments later on if they're needed. So that's the experience I had in town meetings. Towns have changed, as you all know. The other thing I remember from this location, men and women and men, and we used to call the votes. And the clerk would have a ballot box, electing people and acting on warrants, articles. And I was taught to say, would those people whose last names begin with A, B, and C, please come forward to cast your votes. And it worked very well. C, D, E, and F. And then I got to K, L, and M. And all of a sudden, I didn't realize there were probably 30 Kimballs and maybe 25 Millets and a few others that came in that K, L, and M. And I learned to change that. So, I love the meetings when we were full. You know, this was open up. We had, it was chairs out here. Bill Philibron was stoke the fire, and we went at it until we got it done. That's town government, and I've got about another 10 minutes. I'd like to finish with state government, because this is where I kind of feel it had some impact on the state of Maine. I said I got elected in '68, and then again in '70, as a representative of 6 towns in Dobbs County. And I watched and listened and spoke, really. Don't think a new legislator should speak on everything. Don't speak unless you know what you're talking about and you are organized, and make it brief and sit down. They say a good legislator knows to stand up to be seen, speak up to be heard, and sit down to be appreciated. That warning was with me from the very beginning. Don't want to go on. And I'll tell you, if I had been a fly on the wall last night, I would think how far that's gone downhill. So partisan, debates that go on, repeating statements by another person over and over and over. And people feeling that's something they've got to do because the internet is being listened to by the people back home. And that was a new thing for me in more recent terms when I served 7 terms here, represent Waterford and Norway, and 3 or 4 other towns from 2002 to 2010, and then 2028 to 31, 21. So it's 7 terms representing always Waterford and Norway, either West Paris, Greenwood, later Stoneham, Stowe, Sweden, even the unorganized territories, Albany and Mason. And so they're very that's representing about 9,000 people. You take the population of Maine divided by 151 house numbers, you represent almost 9,000 people. You can't possibly be in touch with them all the time, but you can do surveys, you can listen to and ask for comment whenever you have an opportunity at meetings like this. And it's a way to educate yourself and know when it comes to an article that's controversial, don't look to your party, look to your people. And understand what would be best for them. That's my first framework of reference. If it's good for Waterford and Norway, and etc., I am going to lean in favor of supporting it. If it is something I don't know how Norway and Waterford and all the towns feel, I'll use my best judgment. How would it affect the region? How would it affect Oxford County? Being close to New Hampshire, a lot of things make it different when you're in an area like this. And finally, if you don't know how it would affect the region, but you've listened to the conversation, followed the committee report, vote the way you think it ought to be voted. And don't worry about the roll call and the partisanship, because you're better off if you don't. But that's not the way others look at it. It's become so partisan, because in my last 7 years terms, it was always Democrats in control. And therefore, we didn't have a majority. You had to work to get people to cross over and come across the aisle and work together. I found that easy in Governor Ken Curtis, because he never had a majority in 8 years. He was a smart guy, and he actually approached me to be the sponsor of his education reorganization bill, and worked with him, and he always got things done because he was willing to talk with Republicans and Democrats. I talked to Longley. He didn't have a party behind him, but he stayed true to his word. And then Brennan was the following governor. I had worked with him in the House and as Attorney General, and he kept me on for a long time. I knew he wanted to get his own person, so by fall he had found somebody he could put in, and he kept me in the loop all the time through that. McKernan, I served with him when he was a freshman, and when he was in leadership during the Longley years. He asked me to be his legislative director, then made me his commissioner of finance, and then we put together the commissioner of finance and administration. We called it administrative and financial services. And I served with him all 8 years, 5.5 years with Governor King. Then got back into the House in the Waldacci years, served 3.5 years with Paula Page, and the last 8 years I've worked either in the legislative halls or on the legislative staff with Governor Mills. I have a summary of things that you would probably all know. I don't want to leave time for questions because I've talked too damn long, I know that. Things that have happened at the state level in the years starting in '68 and ending in 2024. Internet and social media. Back in the beginning days, the press was there. They covered everything, and they wrote it in media, in printed media. And they treated you fairly, you know. And actually, they would show votes. And every now and then, if it was a tough vote, they would print the entire vote in the House and Senate. And I'll tell you a story, it won't take long. My first year, we adopted the income tax. It was voted, it was brought to the table by Democrat leadership, Republican leadership worked with it. We're in desperate financial shape, and we had an opportunity to into collecting a small amount of individual income tax and corporate income tax. So we enacted it. I got home, someone was playing baseball at an overnight field in Bangor. I love baseball. And I got up to bat, the first inning, and I hit a solid ground ball that would have normally been at least a single, if not a double. And the guy made a great catch on it. I picked it up, threw hard to first, and he got me by a step. And I was going back to the bench, and I heard this voice from up on the hillside. That'll teach you to vote for the income tax. I knew I no longer had any privacy. So that's been true. Other things that you all know, we also had term limits come in, a clean election process where the state funds part of the cost of campaigning. who would choose to play along with it. And we're now seeing animosity and partisanship that gets nasty. We're even seeing violence. And all you gotta do is think about the last few weeks, and even as recently as what happened in Minnesota. People in the elected branches, whether it be legislative or executive, are under fire and at risk at times for people who are not in control of their faculties and do some weird things. All of those things have changed. I'm not sure it's for the better, but I would like to think that we are a better place, a better society, and better off for taking the time to serve the public in that role as an elected official. So I would say, in closing, that when my dad died, my mother and I spoke at his funeral at his service. And my brother wrote his speech out. I learned in the legislature, don't do that. Have an outline of what you want to talk about. So when I came to speak, I said, my father will always be known by us in the family and by those who have come across him in the years of his life for 5 basic principles. First and foremost, family. Family and family reunions, and his love of the family in Waterford. Because when he chose to come back here, all 5 of his siblings were still living. And his grandmother lived right down on Deer Hill Road. So there was a network that he had missed, and he wanted to come back, and he bought that land, Palmer Acres, settled on it in '73. I said family first. Education second, because that's what he studied, that's what he expected us, and all 5 of us boys were told early in our lives, there is no discussion about this. You are all going to college. And we all did. I mean, it was part of what was in his DNA. He wanted us to follow and get a good education and be prepared to be a better person in many ways, not just vocational. Thirdly, he had farming in his blood. My mother would say, maybe farming wasn't third, maybe it was second. At times it felt like it was first. But he always farmed whenever he could, and he lived for a very short time from '73 to '84. Died before his time, but he loved every minute of it. And that little farm up on Deer Hill. And I was the only one of the boys who always had my hands in farming. From Dixmont in 1946 to the present, I've always owned cattle. And I'm the only one that's always worked the fields and tended the barns and tended the animals. And that's part of our DNA, Kathy, and it probably will stay that way as long as I have children that are willing to keep it going. It's not easy, but that was number 3 in this spectrum. Number 4 was public service. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I remember when he would go to meetings, whether it was school, town meeting, range, Ground Bureau, wherever he was always willing to volunteer his time and to get involved and speak his heart and his mind. He was much more outspoken than I am, but he told it like it is, and he was a proud public servant. And then the last one of the 5 was sports. Having been a coach, he coached basketball, baseball, track, cross country, and that was part of his administrative jobs all the way through his 12 years of teaching at the secondary level. And he always gave us boys a chance to play baseball. If we had 300 bales of hay out on Sunday morning, we waited until the game was over on Sunday afternoon before we got the hay on. And we had a beautiful barn. It was fairly new in Dixmont, which was a gambrel roof barn, just like I own down at the Gilson barn, which reminds me so much of that 2-story barn with a hay storage upstairs and nice pine boards, match boards, and a high roof. And he put up a basketball backboard, a nice one. Early on, we didn't ask him to do it, but in front of that room, or that upstairs part, that area, he put up a basketball hoop, bought some basketballs, and he said, we take the hay from that end of the barn first, and when it opens up in the middle of the winter, you guys are free to go up there and play basketball. And it got around in the community, and kids from miles around would come and make there at any time of day or night. They knew where the light switch was, they knew how to climb up there, they knew how to play, and they left the balls, and they tended the cows, and didn't make mess of things. And that was the way he thought about sports. So I know, now I sit here, and I'm 87 years old, and I've been the oldest one in the legislature, and I'm the one, who have two more brothers left. The only one farming, the only one who made public service their entire career, and the only one that stayed with education and government and farming and family as long as my dad did. And that's unbeknownst to me. I walk in his footsteps every day. I do everything he did, maybe a few things. I think I've done it a little bit better. But I followed my dad's priorities. And here I sit, thankful for this opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Andrew, you tell me what you want to do. I've gone on and on.
Thank you so much, Sawin. We're so grateful to be able to hear your story, and more than that, thankful for everything you've done.
Indeed.
Thank you for
Here, here.
Levels of government. I've been in the legislative, executive, I've worked in the judicial, I've worked with the higher eds, I've worked with towns, and I haven't worked with the counties. And I had a chance to run for commissioner a year ago, and now I'm going to play 4 years county commissioner. And in the meantime, I haven't worked in the judicial branch, but now we have the probate court, the district court, and the district attorney. So I've completed full circle. And I am so proud of this building. I had so much fun here, and every one of you contributed to the happiness we've had here tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I think what we'll do is, if we have, there's a couple of plates cookies, I don't know if there's anything else, but why don't we break, and if you have questions for Sawin, I think he's here, you can ask him. Thank you very much again, and thank you all for coming.
We have snacks up front, and if you're interested, we actually have a pretty thorough collection of the Old Town reports, and they are really fascinating.